Okay, so I'm a little bit lost there, but we've been looking at intrinsic human biases that have now become part of the problem. It's always interesting to say when we say biodiversity conservation, environmental conservation, and then we say conservative and liberal in politics. Intrinsically, we know what we mean. Conservation is trying to preserve something even in a changing world, right? So we have seen already words on how we need to be flexible on our pathway to sustainable development, but be resilient in the sense of taking the deviations that are inevitable and then heading back to somehow the sustainable development pathway within the human dimension and environmental footprint, that phase space, so that we are not really trying to stay static, but we are moving forward and dealing with the risks that arise to stay on the pathway to sustainable development. So in that context, what are the biases? We talked about how we have positivity bias in the sense of feeling invincible, underestimating risks or our ability to deal with risks, and thinking that others are facing bigger risks than us and that we are better at handling it, and so on and so forth. So in situations of uncertainty and ambiguity, contradictory information, continuing with the biases, in situations of uncertainty and ambiguity, contradictory information causes psychological discomfort and results in human beings subconsciously trying to make the information fit existing beliefs and to avoid situations that increase such dissonance. This cognitive dissonance is interesting because this idea of being uncomfortable with information or facts that contradict existing beliefs is a very powerful one. It's a confirmation bias or cognitive dissonance. And in fact, research shows that when facts contradict beliefs, many people tend to ignore the facts. So this is a very powerful, bias that is sometimes a major handicap in this situation in dealing with risks that are arising fast, changing fast, uncertainties are still there, ambiguity is still there, and so on. This phenomenon is referred to as cognitive dissonance and causes human beings to select, organize, and distort incoming information to match their preferred and existing beliefs. Deadly dangerous, and yet evolutionarily it has had some advantages, and that's why it survives. I like to think of things that are evolutionarily stable, whether it's altruism or suicides or these kind of biases. Why do they survive over so many generations? Through millennia? Because they must have some advantage, or they are just kind of a reptilian versus cognitive kind of differences. The more entrenched we are in our preferences, ideas, policies, and ideologies, the more liable to cognitive dissonance we become. Compare this to the apparent inability of the international community to think outside the dominant paradigm of market capitalism when addressing sustainability challenges, as we discussed before, or to the friends and colleagues around us who do not want to talk about these challenges or challenges that are needed in our lives to address them. So that's the rational ignorance. You may know everything about climate change and know that we are very much responsible for increasing greenhouse gases, but it may serve you for now to ignore those facts and keep saying no, global warming is either not happening or we are not responsible, this would happen anyway, so that you can continue with your lifestyle and keep arguing that capitalism will take care of all the problems anyway, market forces are the best solution to every problem, and so on. This is a formidable cognitive challenge ahead, one that is skillfully used by agents who want to persevere by agents who want to preserve status quo or at least delay change in order to profit as much as possible, as we'll see in a minute. For instance, another prop coming up, for instance, by actively cultivating a sense of uncertainty or ambiguity concerning climate change, though the entire scientific community agrees on the main causes and principles of it. Right? So that's the oops, where did I bit far away in terms of figure 612. Figure 612 is again a prop. It's called the ostrich mentality, burying your head in the mud, and usually it's sand, but here for good measure they have used land that is hit by drought and has desiccated and dried up, and you are burying your head in that in terms of climate denial. So forgetting that we always have an infinite number of potential contingent scenarios ahead of us, while only having one past has another unfortunate effect that impedes learning. This cognitive bias is commonly referred to as hindsight bias and causes human beings to exaggerate the predictability of an event after it has actually occurred. Okay, think about it. Human beings exaggerate the predictability of an event after it has actually occurred. They will say, yeah, we knew it was coming, or it was not unexpected, and so on. Originally referred to as knew-it-all attitude, this bias is common in everyday life as well as in evaluations of after disaster. Fishoff here, communication person, writes very nice papers about the exaggerated sense of effective communication that many climate scientists and scientists in general have as well. Most people have probably encountered hindsight bias one way or another in the last week. So you have experienced something where you have said, yeah, I know it. In comments like "I told you so," when you cannot recollect any such ambiguous message from before the event. And in the rhetorical question like how could they not see that coming, when there were in fact myriad possible outcomes depending on numerous interdependent factors. Hindsight bias is, in other words, about recently acquired information influencing the recollection of the past information. You reinterpret the past based on the recent outcome, which was one of myriad possibilities, but you would reinterpret the past saying, yes, this is exactly how it was expected to happen. I knew it. It distorts memories, highlighting what you now know was important and downplaying what turned out to be less important. Allows you to take the complex pre-event situation with its many interdependent factors and possible pathways and turn it into a simple linear story. Hindsight bias has over the years helped our brains and to retain and store validated and relevant information, but is detrimental for learning how to act in coming situations if not explicitly taken into account when thinking about what happened in the past. Hindsight bias is also connected to social constraints for resilience that are presented below. So we'll move forward with that. This is the climate denial part. I will add a bit more about where the complications may also come from, or why climate change denial can be exploited by vested interests like energy companies or investment firms, or people who are trying to sell internal combustion engines and so on and so forth. So here is the map of the figure of temperature change and CO2 change since, let's say, about the Industrial Revolution. CO2 is a well-mixed greenhouse gas, inert mostly, and lasts for centuries, so it's easy to measure accurately and precisely, and if you measure at few places you get a good sense of the hemispheric or even global concentrations of CO2 in the atmosphere, and it's been increasing, and we know very well what the concentration is like and how it's not only increasing but it's accelerating and so on. And there is the temperature change associated with that, which shows lots of ups and downs. Science is very clear on this, that the ocean has a huge heat capacity, so it can take additional energy trapped by the increased CO2, which also scientifically we know very well in terms of energy balance of greenhouse gas increases and incoming solar, outgoing thermal energy, and so on. And ocean can store it, and ocean in fact takes up 93% of the additional heat we are generating from increased greenhouse gases and global warming. And the energy that is increasing because of this trapping of additional thermal energy is going into melting glaciers as well, and in evaporating the oceans, putting more moisture in the atmosphere, and so on. And there are ways in which the ocean takes up heat on interannual timescales or year-to-year timescales and releases back during events called El Nino and La Nina. I have lots of podcasts on that if you don't know what they mean. But these are called natural variabilities. So even though greenhouse gases are increasing, global warming is happening, dynamics of the climate because of incoming energy and outgoing thermal energy doesn't stop. We have to constantly move energy from low latitudes where there is energy excess to polar latitudes where there is energy deficit. Part of that is winds, currents in the ocean, cyclones, hurricanes, and so on and so forth. So temperatures from year to year, because of all these regions, will always go up and down. As long as sun is going north and south and seasons are there will be natural variability, season to season variability, year to year variability, decade to decade variability. The key question is how global warming will modulate these natural variabilities. Will El Niños become more intense, more frequent, and so on and so forth, right? So this figure can be used by vested interest to say, look, CO2 is doing something, temperature is doing something else, so there is no real relation between CO2 and temperature. And it can work for poor people, lay people who do not understand the details. But you can add some details to what people understand. What happens year to year is not necessarily climate. It is climate because once we say weather is few days and climate is beyond a season. So in that sense, it is climate. But actually, when you say climatology, you tend to average, let's say, over 10 years. So if you look at temperature changes globally from decade to decade, using a baseline, you always look at deviations of the decades from a baseline temperature, something like 1850 to 1900 or 1960 to 1990. The baseline doesn't matter because the warming and cooling will only shift a little when you shift the baseline. So you can see that before about the 1930s, we were cooler than the baseline. We started warming in the 1930s and 50s, 60s, 70s. So now each decade is warmer than the previous decade, which clearly shows that even though year to year temperatures jump up and down because of internal variability and the ocean's ability to take up and release heat at these time scales, there is no hiding the fact that global temperatures each decade are now warmer than the previous decade. So climate denial in that sense is easily applied to human biases and make believe that climate change is not real. But there are other ways to think about it. If we are going to do resilience and sustainable development anyways, then you just need enough people to realize that climate change is happening and sustainable development is needed for us and for future generations. Then climate deniers cannot really stop you from going ahead with sustainable development, because human development index will also keep improving. So eventually you need enough people to believe and work towards this resilient pathway to sustainable development. So we'll come back and read some more about the challenges to operationalizing resilience, and we'll look at the social challenges up next. So these are interesting points, important to understand, because anything you do or want to do in terms of engaging communities, individuals, governments, and so on into sustainable development pathways, you will need to understand what are the biases you are dealing with actually, so that you can work around them, overcome them, create messages to get past them, and so on and so forth. Okay, see you in the next podcast.